died in my arms.
And a threat
Sebastian will be killed if they don't get their money back.
won't deter her.
I have to help them.
By herself.
Who were they?
Not as herself.
Magdalena Krasinska.
She moves in.
He'll suss you in 2 minutes.
Sunday at 9.
Playing a part and it's too dangerous.
Helen Mirren's first major TV role since Prime Suspect, Painted Lady.
Glade Essence of Nature fragrant candles. Created by nature, captured by Glade.
Everyone knows that a package holiday makes your money go further. Well, now BT have introduced the same simple idea to telephones. For just £2.95 a month, you get up to 250 minutes of call time, and your choice of an extra service like call waiting. It's Call Friends and Family Value Plan, and you can find out more by calling 0800 800 060. You might not pay for an extra holiday, but maybe a few extra lessons.
There's a powerful remedy for the 4 main symptoms of flu. Benylin 4
Flu reduces fever, relieves aches and pains, soothes coughing, combats congestion, and so aids restful sleep. Benylin 4 Flu for powerful flu relief.
The original Wild Child, Marianne Faithfull, Brit Girls, tonight at 9 on 4.
Well, before that, the People's Parliament debates what to do about juvenile offenders.
Hello and welcome to Scotland, where 80 people of different ages and backgrounds are gathering behind me to decide whether to take a drastic but perhaps a necessary measure. In order to protect communities and to make life safe for teenagers in particular, should we take away a basic freedom from all young people? That's the question tonight for the People's Parliament.
To order. The motion before us tonight is that to combat juvenile crime, all children under the age of 15 should be subject to a 10 p.m. curfew. Now, almost everything that worries adults about teenagers seems to happen in the dark and on the streets. Kids commit crime, take drugs, drink, and end up on the receiving end of violence. So the solution for Home Secretary Jack Straw and a pilot scheme here in Scotland seems to be the same: curfews for kids. But will the People's Parliament back it? Here to propose the motion is Alistair Orr.
Ladies and gentlemen, a 10 p.m. curfew would see communities all over the country start to fight back against a scourge of youth crime. It would force parents to realise that their children are also their responsibility. Pride and a respect for property could be restored to many areas currently at breaking point. The time for turning our heads the other way is over. Let us confront this menace, challenge it, and in passing this motion this evening, start dealing with it. This is my film.
Each year, 7 million crimes are committed by juveniles, costing taxpayers £1 billion. Recent Home Office figures show the number of 10 to 17-year-olds sentenced rose for the second successive year in 1995. Delinquency has become an epidemic, putting communities under siege. How can we feel safe in our homes and on the streets after dark if we are always living in fear of violent encounters with youngsters who are simply out of control? Because this estate in Hamilton near Glasgow was terrorised by gangs of kids, residents asked for police help to keep youngsters off the streets at night. Tommy Morgan's windows have been smashed so often he's been forced out of his own front room.
So I moved into the back and I put a board up at the back window. But they've drove me out of here As well as the windows going in, as well as me phoning the police constantly, the front door was getting hot with wine bottle. It wasn't just like you have a couple of days rest. There was no rest. And I'm telling you, although I said that I'm fairly stubborn, I was frightened. I was really frightened.
The success of the 6-month trial has been shown by the drop in calls for help to the police from 20 a day to 3.
The higher profile policing that the areas have been getting through the initiative has acted as a deterrent for petty vandalism, street drinking, etc.
I asked Constable Armstrong about the child protection element of the curfew.
In my opinion, it's very important. It's high on my list, the welfare of the kids that we take home. We assess on our arrival, whatever time it may be, whether or not we think that the kid's going to be exposed to danger, i.e. it could be the company they're keeping or the particular area they're in. Depending on those circumstances, we then decide whether we're taking the kid home or not.
Later in the evening, we met a young boy out alone. In the first month of these patrols, the police escorted home almost 100 under-16s, including 18 children under the age of 10.
Speaking to the wee fella's mother, on returning him home, she was delighted and very supportive. We explained the circumstances that we'd found him in. What we were mainly concerned about was the quiet lane that he was going to be walking down to where he stays. Given his age, given the area and our local knowledge of the area, we felt it best that we make sure that he's escorted home safe and sound.
Although the Hamilton initiative isn't officially a curfew, everyone calls it that, and it's having a great impact on the whole community.
Curfew has affected us quite a lot. There's not groups of boys hanging about. I do feel safer in my own home. I'm a single parent with 4 children. I know that the police are patrolling the area, and I know that there's no rowdiness, and if I do say anything, I know the police will be here, and I do feel a lot safer that it has started up.
So this is the choice. We either let juvenile crime continue to escalate, or we face up to the problem and give our police the chance to do their job of protecting all sections of society.
Right, well, thanks, Alistair. Can we have questions for the proposer? Right, Janet.
I'd like to say, I know exactly what Tommy feels. I had 6 months of it back in '96. I was last in the close, I was getting my window broken. Whenever I left the house, I live alone, they'd come in, they'd steal my phone, they'd steal my answer phone, I couldn't work, they'd steal my Christmas presents. I knew who they were, I knew fine who they were. I caught 2 of them breaking in. The police wouldn't prosecute because there was only one witness. It was my house, it was my front door. Let nobody who hasn't lived through that for 6 months, and if I wasn't a Christian, I'd have been an alky by the end of it, turn around and tell me that children of 9 and 10, and I knew who they were, should be running free on the streets. Can you really involve the people who are interested in building up the community in enforcing these curfews, with which I entirely agree?
I would be against any sort of guardian angel, if I could put it that way, approach to solving the sort of problems that you suggest. But yes, I do think that there is a role for the community in assisting the police with this matter. Yes, I do.
If the crime is committed before 10, who's responsible for that then?
Well, just because you have a curfew, it doesn't mean to say that ordinary policing stops out with the hours of the curfew.
So why impose a curfew? If the ordinary policing can continue after 10, why impose a curfew?
I mean,
all you're trying to do is shifting the timing of the violence. The violence will be committed prior to 10 instead of after 10.
Okay.
You're not eradicating the problem.
I think we could see that this pilot that is going on is as a result of a desire from the community to address the problem.
It's all cosmetic. You're showing what you want to show.
The £10 billion total cost of youth crime and in processing that crime in this country, I would suggest to you that is a bill we cannot no longer afford.
We fully agree that bill can't be afforded, but we can put the same money in a community project, in education, in welfare society.
I think we have to accept that what has been tried up till now has failed. And it's with that, it's patently failed because the incidence of youth crime has climbed.
Right, can we have that as a question, please, Chris?
You're saying that other things have been tried. I would have to say, certainly in your film, I didn't see any youth and community centres. Could we not argue that this money could have been resourced so that children productively can spend their time, rather than feeling if they need to be out of the house, they have to hang around and be picked up by police?
Do we then take that we as a society have to provide things to stop children committing crime? No. There's no excuse. There's absolutely no excuse for committing crime. The fact of your background, if your family's unemployed and all of that, it's a total excuse culture, and it needs to be nailed now.
Right, George.
Do you agree the problem is parenting, and how are we going to instruct parents to be better parents?
Well, responsible parenting is an extremely important issue, but we've got to accept that in many, many areas, this has broken down. And to address this, we've got to take this radical step of imposing a curfew. Look at Tommy, for instance, on the film. Now, Tommy's had his window put in 5 times, and he's at the end of his tether. I suggest to you we're at breaking point. It gives me no pleasure to put this to you in this manner, but there needs to be some reality of the situation from us.
Right, well, thanks to Alistair there for his evidence. Now, his seconder is a man who's had first-hand experience of curfews. Gil Kerlikowski is Police Commissioner of Buffalo City in New York State. Right, can I have questions for Gil?
So what is the sort of a procedure for picking them up?
The final procedure used most effectively this summer was to expand an intensive curfew enforcement for 17 weeks. We did it 3 nights a week, but it was random nights because you get a tremendous beneficial effect, because a lot of the kids will actually ask officers, is the curfew car out tonight? Are the curfew cars working? They make a judgment decision as to whether to take the child home, find out what the problem is themselves, or take the child to the drop-off center manned by the volunteers and social workers.
If the child appears to be reluctant to be picked up, do you have street chases? Do you have a lot of confrontation? Or are some of the children quite pleased to be picked up?
None of them are quite pleased to be picked up. And actually, the very sad part of that is that because we found them looking for parents in bars or establishments selling narcotics, and even in the most abusive situation, we found these children protecting the parents. So none of them are happy to be picked up, but we've seen some pretty heart-rending results of having this tool.
Rosalind Doyle, I wonder, could you tell me in terms of percentages how the black population measures up to the white population in terms of numbers of arrests in your particular city?
Yes, it's underrepresented in the curfew enforcement. There was a very great fear in our largest minority community as African American that this would be disproportionately applied to that community. In fact, it was not, and it is applied citywide. And what we've actually found, of course, is that the problem just doesn't exist in our poor communities or in our public housing. The problem exists throughout our city.
I've got some experience of being in a children's home when I was younger, and like most of the children there were let out with control because the staff couldn't control them. They were running away, police were bringing them back and everything else. And bearing in mind that most kids that are out at this time, a lot of parents don't care, how do you propose to get the parents to take responsibility for these children?
We cannot use this ordinance to make them become better parents. All we can do is really use it to try and assess what's wrong and perhaps save the kid.
Stuart.
If these are children that are hardened criminals, what's to stop them just opening the front door and going straight back out to meet their friends again and to roam around
Nothing.
the streets?
There's absolutely nothing that would prevent that kind of situation.
So in many cases you could just be providing an escort service home for the child?
Somewhat, which isn't the worst thing.
So that's a Moult's question. There are exemptions, I take it. I mean, if a child is leaving a youth club or has been to a birthday party or whatever, I take it if it's got a parent taking it home, that's okay, yeah?
There are a number of exceptions that apply. A note from a parent, going out to run an emergency errand, coming from an authorized place of employment, a number of exceptions apply.
So if you have a note, that's okay?
Yes.
I mean, the child could make the note out themselves, no?
Exactly. Actually, again, having spent 26 years as a police officer and dealing with thousands of kids, I think you underestimate the communication skills that exist between these officers.
You probably accept yourself that there are a lot of violent parents in Buffalo.
The violence is high.
So don't you accept them by clearing kids from the streets, kids who may see the streets as a safer place than the home itself?
We found children that in fact believe that the safer place for them to be is on the streets, and streets in a fairly tough part of the city, rather than the abusive situation that they've been at home. But because we have this tool, and because we have the backup consortium of social workers, they assess the problem and they find out what it is, and we try to work to either strengthen that family, or if that isn't going to work, we support removing the child from the home and going to, in fact, a safer environment. But also, there are a lot of kids out there that get themselves into trouble.
Your curfew is for child protection,
yes,
which is quite different from the proposal, which is to stop juvenile crime.
The thrust is child protection, but I really would be remiss in not telling you that also we have a number of complaints from older people about rowdy kids on street corners, and this gives the officers a tool to deal with them. So I'd say it's a little of both.
Right, lots of questions still to come, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Many thanks to Gil Kerlikowski. Well, the Select Committee is next. I declare the House adjourned.
So the Chamber is in unquestionably a sceptical mood. This scheme might be too authoritarian. Shouldn't the money and priorities be spent on more community-based initiatives for tackling crime? But then we got the example from the United States of America, a practical example which seemed to address some, at least, of their suspicions. But we'll get a clearer idea when I speak to some of them on the lobby floor. Sorry to interrupt. Steve, if I could ask you, were you convinced at all by the example we heard just then from America that this at least is a way partly of tackling youth crime?
Well, I mean, if you chain people at their front doors, they'll have much less capacity to commit a crime. I think you were dealing with two different things. The US are looking at some sort of child protection strategy with spin-off youth crime, possibly up to a point. What we're looking at is a strategy where we will stop youth crime. Now, I think it came across quite clearly. Most youth crimes committed during the day. It's unfair to criminalise all young people on the basis of the actions of what are a few.
Murray, let me have a word with you, because you are a supporter of a curfew. I get the impression a lot of your colleagues are suspicious of it. Was there anything that police officers said to reassure them?
The man speaks sense. I mean, he's got first-hand experience of it. He seems to know what he's doing, and he seems to be getting results through it. So, you know, I'm convinced it's certainly okay. Other people maybe, I think, need a bit more swaying.
So signs that examples of curfews are impressing some MPPs, but will they be enough to sway the Select Committee meeting next?
When you walk the streets, what worries you most? Muggers, drunks, thugs, or meteorites? Up to 18,000 crash through the atmosphere every year and don't stop until they hit something. Discovery Channel. What's really happening? That's a family of 4. They're over 2,000 feet away. Can you hear them? A shark can. And you can reach them in less than 45 seconds. Discovery Channel. What's really happening?
Welcome back to the People's Parliament, where in the first part we heard from 2 speakers arguing strongly that there should be a curfew for those who are 15 and under. Now it's the turn of our Select Committee here to question expert witnesses who are strongly opposed to the motion.
Well, welcome to the Select Committee. The 4 of you have the task of interviewing 3 experts who are all here because they oppose the motion. That's to say they don't want to see children being curfewed. Carol, now you strongly agree with that, like you don't want to see a curfew introduced.
Yes.
Has that got anything to do with you being a mum and in fact a foster mum?
Yes, I think it's got a lot to do with working with children for a number of years. I think that the children that offend, a curfew wouldn't affect them whatsoever.
Even though you have to curfew some of your foster kids?
Yes, I certainly have to curfew, and the police do bring them back, and they do just say, up yours, we don't care.
Right, Bill, you're a solicitor. You also effectively had a bit of curfewing in your own childhood. Did it make a difference?
Yes, I certainly think that I probably benefited from a curfew, and I didn't think that it did either myself or any of my contemporaries any harm at all.
Right. Kirsten, you're an occupational therapist, and you had quite a different experience when you were young, which did effectively amount to a curfew for you as well.
I grew up in West Yorkshire where Peter Sutcliffe was out raping and murdering women, so most children in our area and most women had a self-imposed or parentally imposed curfew where we just did not go out on our own after dark.
Right, Daniel, you're a part-time lecturer, which also brought you to work in Canada, where you'd experience of alternatives to curfews.
Yeah, I'm a bit unsure about curfews, simply because of the civil rights issue, but also I think it's also a case of access and what access and opportunities there are for kids to do rather than be on the streets. In Canada, I did a lot of community work with kids at risk, which was either education, games, whatever.
Right, well, surprisingly, everyone then seems to have quite an experience of curfews. Let's see what you make of our first witness.
Ian Comfort is a youth court magistrate and a qualified teacher.
Welcome to the Select Committee. Now, I think the first question is from Daniel.
How enforceable do you think a curfew is?
Now, if you're talking about a blanket curfew for all young people, there's a significant number of those to try to keep indoors after 10 o'clock at night. I think the second issue is to do with the confrontation that may emerge when you start going up to young people and challenging about how old they are, why they're on the streets, whether they've got authority to be on the streets. What are the exceptions to the curfew? What is the law going to say that gives you a right to be on the streets, and how are they going to deal with that? Those will present a number of difficulties. The police have got limited resources. Social services departments have got limited resources. Education departments have got limited resources. Therefore, who's going to pay for all of the policing the streets, the picking up the young people, the putting them into care and everything else? It's going to be quite expensive and quite difficult. What's going to happen is probably the police will target certain geographical areas or certain groups. It's quite likely in London that they would probably target black groups. It's quite likely they would probably target certain housing estates. It's quite likely they would certainly target areas where there are potential problems. And nice suburbs like Ealing may not be targeted.
Don't you think, though, that there might be an argument to say that there would be basically a change in the climate? You know, it might mean that they're just expecting to have interaction with the police if they're out late at night.
I think you need to talk about to a lot of young people and how their views of the police are and whether that's going to be a very healthy environment. There was a research a couple of years ago which said that clearly young people don't trust the police and they don't really trust teachers either, and there aren't many adults they do trust. Now, what you're going to end up with is a lot of confrontation between those young people and the police who are trying to enforce it.
Even though the evidence we've had from the one scheme that's running is that that hasn't happened.
But you've got evidence from the United States. And it's a very different situation in the United States. In America, they think it's okay to carry guns.
Well, wouldn't that suggest confrontation is more likely than less? Intelligent people who have been trained and have maybe had their eyes opened, actually, to some of the difficulties of society are brought into a situation with a couple of rules, more powers. It can actually improve things.
No. Why would you want to impose against all young people that they must be indoors, first of all? And that's the primary reason. Why would you want to put the curfew on in the first place? Young people themselves who've got a voice would immediately start saying to police, we do not agree with this law.
Do you have children of your own?
Yes.
And may I ask you how old your children are?
I have a daughter of 8 and a son of 12.
And would you regard yourself as being irresponsible parent?
I hope I'm a fairly responsible parent.
But do you not feel that for some people that a system of curfew would be a good thing because it might well instill responsibility into parents who perhaps didn't share the same sense of responsibility as you, for example, share with your own towards your own children? How would you
do you think that we should impose a curfew on everybody because there's a minority that's not complying? Can I just take an example? If we say that too many adults are drunk when pubs close, do we actually ban all adults from pubs? because a few disobey and mess around. What you're actually saying is the state should impose a rule on everybody. Now, I believe that children, for example, should brush their teeth. I don't expect an Act of Parliament to enforce it.
But the effect of a child not brushing their teeth is not the same as the effect of a child breaking a window 5 times and forcing someone to live in their back room.
But most children are not breaking windows and forcing people to live in a back room.
He went on to argue that it was an overreaction to place the spotlight on young people when it was more often adults who committed crimes, sometimes against youngsters.
Blanket curfew for all young people.
As a magistrate, what alternatives would you have for dealing with this situation?
As a magistrate, we come in contact with a small group of young people who are committing crime. Most of those young people, once they've been before the court once, never come back before the court again. We have a small group of young people who are recidivists, who come back time and time again. But it is a small group. In any London borough, it represents about 20 young people out of a population of 200,000. Well, those young people need clear programmes to work through. They need programmes of activity. They need programmes of education. Most of them are excluded from school. They need adults who they can relate to. They need to actually have substitute parents almost in their life, somebody they can work with. Now, I'd prefer that option rather than going round and locking them up in custody or locking them up at home. I don't think either is positive.
Ian, thanks for your arguments to the Select Committee.
Thank you.
Thanks. Now, what about this evidence?
You know, I mean, in an ideal world, he's right. I mean, in an ideal world, we don't want to have a situation where we have to take young people off the street against their will. But unfortunately, in the society which we live in at the moment, young children are open to a great deal of dangers, and anything we can do to prevent them being exposed to this must be a good thing.
He didn't convince me. I mean, he pointed all the holes and the problems, but I see this as being, it's got such a momentum now. You've got New Labour blowing it in the air. It seems such a perfect policy for them, low money, nice effect. You've got to have a pretty good argument to stop that bandwagon.
Right, OK, well, let's see what you make of our next witness.
Dan Seymour is a human rights officer for Save the Children.
Dan, welcome to the hot seat there.
Thank you.
First question from Kirsten.
Dan, could you tell us a little bit about the work you do and why you're opposed to this motion?
Save the Children, if you're not familiar with it, is probably the largest international children's charity in the UK. We feel very strongly that curfews are not the right way to tackle this problem. Curfews, we feel, are potentially very harmful to children's development. It's just basically a very unfair way to treat children. Really, the curfews approach, I think, really reveals a very unhealthy way of looking at the role of children in our society, and I think it says a lot of very worrying things about the way we're looking at our young people and children.
The statement that you made, it was harmful to the development of the child. Could you go into that into more detail, please?
Sure. Childhood is the most developmental stage of life. It's where you grow up, you develop all the traits and abilities and skills, you realise your potential, and that carries right through the rest of your life. It's a vital stage, and what's more, it's a vital stage you only get one go at. Nobody's allowed to go back and have another go at being a child. And during that time, you really, I mean, I think it's probably better that you are out socialising, learning to interact, doing all the sorts of things that are a lot better than staying in watching videos all the time.
And he went on to suggest that kids should not be seen as an awkward inconvenience. Instead, a sense of maturity and responsibility should be encouraged.
How would you deal with the small minority of very irresponsible parents?
If we're talking about negligent parents, parents who aren't looking after their children properly, again, I would come back to the reservations I have about curfews. Maybe I'm being a bit dense, but I can't understand how someone who is worried about negligent parents proposes to shut children in the home with those negligent parents.
And the problem with the rights debate is that you quickly flip to the other side and you've got competing rights. What do you say to people, for instance, Tommy in the video we saw, what do you say to him who is, surely he has a right to live without fear and to live in a neighbourhood without?
I wouldn't disagree with that for one moment, but to therefore impose a blanket curfew on all children in that area is simply not fair.
But let's just pursue Danny's point there about fairness. I mean, the question is, though, is it fair to Tommy who's pretty clear that it's a certain bunch of kids that are doing something, to wait, depend, hope, invest all his energies in hoping that all these other systems that we've talked about all night will somehow stop his problem? Or is it fair for him to say, if it just wasn't possible for these kids to be walking around easily, they would probably be picked up a lot easier, and I would not have to be living in one back room in my house?
He deserves to have higher levels of policing. He deserves all the other initiatives that were going on at the same time as this pilot curfew. But I don't think he deserves or should feel he has a right to expect a blanket curfew to be applied to all children. OK, thanks very much indeed for your evidence, Dan. Thank you.
Bill?
He was very swayed by the opinions of very young children, and clearly, if you ask an 8 or 9-year-old child, are you in favour of this curfew? The chances are they're probably going to say no. And I think that in some instances you have to take a stand which is in their best interest, even if they feel that it isn't.
Right, Carol, you two are just going to disagree about everything, aren't you?
I think we are, yes. I found him extremely presentable. I think he put his case over very well, and I really think that the harmful to the development of children point came across very well.
Right, OK, well, let's see what you make now of our third witness.
Chloe Janis was a disruptive teenager who's now using her experience to help other young children and families.
Chloe, we're here to discuss the benefits or otherwise of introducing a curfew on children under the age of 15. Tell us a little about your experiences.
I had a very unhappy childhood, and I was taking his care when I was 11 years old. And from then on, it just got worse. I was stealing cars, I was doing drugs, I was drinking at all hours of the day, and I was very, very violent to anybody, and very abusive, some burglaries, yeah.
What kind of age were you when you started this?
12.
12.
I was 12 when I first started the cocaine and heroin, and I was 13 when I started doing the burglaries and stealing cars.
And you ended up on the streets. How long were you on the streets for?
3 months.
When you were 15, 14, and somebody had imposed a blanket curfew, had imposed a curfew totally on you, what would you have done?
It wouldn't have worked.
No, exactly. You and your friends would have played dodge the cops.
I can only talk from what I've experienced. And what I've experienced is, and being within care with all these young people and working with them now as a reformed person, they're angry. They are so angry at the whole world. They're angry at their parents, they're angry at school, they're angry at the police, they're angry at every single adult in their life. And they don't know how to get the anger out. And what happens is, what happens is the vicious cycle comes. They then hang around with their friends, they get they get into crime or something, they do a little thing, and they feel good. They actually feel good for the first time in their whole life. They actually feel good. They feel like they've achieved something.
In your tearaway days, you know, what would you have said to a copper who was trying to put you back into a place you didn't want to go?
I would have just, I would have hit him actually. I would have.
She went on to say she was saved by Noelle, who became her foster mother, offering affectionate and attentive parenting.
I came to a realisation, I hit rock bottom, and that was it. I'm sorry to say this, but I was raped in Victoria High Street, and it was a very violent rape. And I got to her house, I don't know how I did it, but in the middle of the night somehow. She took me in, basically, she took me in. She said to me, after the next day, she said to me, do you want to come and live here? And I said yes. And from then on, slowly, I was just rebuilding my life back again, something I've never really had. I'd never had, a life.
And what did she do for you?
What did she do for me? She listened to me. She gave me an incredible amount of love, and she also gave me an incredible sense of being listened to, which I didn't get when I was in the children's home.
Well, Chloe, there's not going to be a dryer in the house if you don't leave, so why don't you leave and we'll try and talk about what you've just said.
I think that Chloe is a very brave girl to come forward and talk like she did with us today. It's very, very difficult for children that have been abused in that way to speak up.
Yeah, Bill?
I thought she was absolutely excellent. I really did. And she spoke with such conviction, such honesty, and she really knew what she was talking about. I think that someone like that, if we're going to introduce a system for looking after young children, this young lady and people like her should be involved in giving advice.
Well, that is a very hard job to follow, but somebody's got to do it. Kirsten, it's your task to try and make sense out of all the different views there are around this table and come back with a verdict from the Select Committee. Good luck to you.
MPPs noted it was good parenting which saved Chloe, but does that mean curfews are wrong? The Chamber decides next.
There are risks every minute of every day. Whales, for some reason, can't detect a catamaran's approach. You have to navigate round them. Icebergs as big as cathedrals. Waves up to 60 feet. Winds above 70 knots. All technology can fail. It's whether you can cope that counts. We're trying to beat the record non-stop around the world.
Because we all take risks, we all need insurance companies behind us. Ours reaches all over the world. Royal Sunalliance. We make it possible for people to do the things they want to do.
We check the compass every minute and live every second.
Having heard the cases for and against a curfew, open debate precedes the vote.
I call the House to order. It's time to hear back from the Select Committee. Kirsten.
You're probably not surprised to hear that the Select Committee is split 50-50 in favour and in opposition of this motion. So I'm going to speak for those of us who are in favour. We were particularly impressed by the evidence from the Chief of Police from America. We appreciate that there are cultural differences, but we do feel that with a bit of fine tweaking, that is something that could be introduced here and perhaps would eventually work.
Now, there was a minority, not a minority, an equal, an opposite view. Daniel, you're representing that.
There is a problem, and people do have a right to have a happy community and to live without fear. However, I don't think the way this motion is framed will actually tackle that properly. I think there are much more better solutions to take.
I'm opening this now to the floor for general debate. Could I just start off perhaps by asking how many of us here were angels at the age of 13 or 14? Yes.
Can I just say that I had to be in for 10:30 when I was like 15. It didn't stop me running about the streets, it didn't stop me drinking, it didn't stop me getting up to mischief, because it was the whole idea of having fun, because there's nothing else to do at that age.
And, I mean, in that vein, would you have seen it as, you know, smart you were to have actually managed to outwit your parents and the police if there was a curfew?
I didn't outwit my parents and the police. I get caught doing many things. We get caught taking people's doormats and piling them all up outside the one house and stuff like that. So we get caught doing things that we shouldn't have been doing, and I did get reprimanded appropriately. I get hit for it, I get kept in for it, but it didn't stop me getting back out and doing other things to have fun, because there was nothing else to do.
So what's the solution to that? I mean, you want the state to deal with your fun to make so you can have a good time, because you can't have a good time with other ordinary people. That makes no sense.
Right, let her answer. Let her answer.
The state was not dealing with me having fun. I was not costing the state any money, neither was. And my parents were responsible for me, and it had nothing to do with the upbringing I had. It was to do with the peers that I was going around with, and it was also to do with me living in a highly deprived area, because some people are less fortunate.
George!
I've lived in a highly deprived area. What children need in their lives are love, discipline, structure and a sense of worth and guidance. And if you give this to children, then they will see there is a clearly defined line. When I did wrong, I expected retribution to follow, not praise, counselling and aromatherapy.
So you were a bit of... So, George, were you a bit of a one when you were younger? What did you actually do?
Oh, I enjoyed fighting. I was a bit of a tour act, but I knew that if I get caught, then retribution would follow. And I accepted that.
But you accepted it. Did
Yep.
you stop being a tour rag, in your own words?
No.
So what good did it do you?
Well, it laid the basis for me to critically examine myself when I became more mature and more moral. I don't know why you're laughing.
Order.
I don't know why you're laughing. Yes, you know, you've got the hot fire of youth in you. As the Commissioner will agree, if you get the sound foundation laid by your parents, when you mature, you can take on moral responsibility and you can put some of these things to the side.
I think you're coming from a system that's objectionable from the very core. You know, that whole structure is useless these days. You know, you've got to evolve or die. And I would like to see.
I said love, discipline, a sense of worth, and structure.
Discipline.
Discipline. Yes, that's the dirty D
Right,
word,
can
isn't
I
it?
exert a little discipline because we can't follow this argument? What's your objection to the notion of discipline? You just don't think there's any point?
No, I think it's good to tell young people what will do other people good and what will do themselves good. But I don't think that driving it home to them through threats or physical abuse is what's going to let them learn their lesson.
Right, okay, Jerry.
When we're talking about discipline, we have to look at cultural difference as well. Because where I was brought up, I was not only disciplined by my parents, I was disciplined by the community as well.
So what's the answer then, Jerry, if
Well,
parents don't
the answer
care?
is, according to culture different, in my country, I don't think we need curfew unless there's a coup d'etat. But besides that, in the Western world, you have to think that maybe curfew might be necessary. Because I've been in the street where kids just did things to me and they walk away, and I can't do the thing. What about an older person? This guy's house was broken into, and he's not the only one.
Is there anybody here who was a bit of a tearaway in their younger days, but just would not want their kids to be doing what they did when they were young? Is there anyone honest enough to talk about that?
My father was a bit of a tearaway and was butched at a young age of 14 and became quite a gangster in the city. And I, like my family, were the same. And for a small period of time before I ended up getting married, I was the same. I ran about with gangs and was quite a violent person as well. But I ended up that my grandmother took me in and showed me a different way of life. And my father was murdered eventually and lay in a slab in Glasgow's mortuary. And that shocked me into the way I am now, that you live by the sword, you die by the sword. It's as simple as that.
And do you have kids now?
I have a daughter, yes, I do. Yeah.
So what would happen if she started acting the way that you had? I mean, would you feel a curfew would help or not?
I don't think a curfew would help, no. Because even when I was younger, my mother tried to keep me in the house at times, and I would just climb out the window, or I would just go out the door, or I'd just push by her. It was as simple as that.
So are you saying that it's hopeless to have any kind of discipline?
No, you must have discipline. Yeah, but as was said earlier on, you must gel it with love. You must look after your children. You must show them there's a better way.
I'd like to say that we can see from the gentleman from Buffalo, and also I think a little from Hamilton, that at least curfews do no harm, bearing in mind the disastrous quality of life of many victimised people in housing schemes. Why don't we try it for a year and see if it works as part of a package of care? And I don't see why we separate caring for the children and caring for protection of adults. I think they're two indissoluble matters.
Right, Kay.
The need for a curfew is irrelevant because the police already have the powers to lift children and take them home. And what we need is more police on the streets and much better community facilities.
The police do have powers, I quite agree. But how do you deal with the gangs of girls who come round and terrorise my children? They're not really causing any criminal damage, but they're shouting abuse and they're not being, you know, my child is driven indoors. The police don't have powers to pick those sort of people up who aren't causing any criminal damage, but they are affecting the quality of life of my children.
Okay, yeah.
Are they doing this after 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, or are they doing this at 5 o'clock at night? What difference is a curfew going to make here?
Stephen?
Now, I have to tell you, there isn't actually anything wrong with street corners. We all spent some time on them as young people. What you're learning about is how to interact with your peers, how to interact with other people. You are learning. It is a social thing. And can I tell you, just one other thing, sometimes parent-child relationships can get a bit fraught. As a matter of fact, the last place you want to be, if you want to develop, as opposed to end up as a bloodstain in the wall, is in your own home.
I didn't spend time in street corners because I was fortunate in the way I was brought up. I had places to go. I didn't need to spend time in street corners. But I would agree with you, we need to do things, we need to provide facilities. Because if we go back to previous debates we've had, the reason children are hanging about and smoking in street corners is because what else can they do cheaply in this day and age?
Okay,
we've got to provide, but we'll go back to what Chloe says, it's only this is part solution of a problem that we've got to look at from a social perspective.
As far as I can understand it, my parents, who certainly loved and looked after me, seem to have spent their entire childhood out in the street. They've grown up into perfectly reasonable people. I don't see why this generation of young people shouldn't do exactly the same. Because they're not little demons. They're the same as kids have always been. Some of them are bad and most of them are good.
Okay, right at the back.
Actually, if you think about it, when we were all teenagers, we all done things that were wild and things that we shouldn't have done. And it's a natural part of growing up. And what we should be doing is working with young people to guide through that process of growing up, getting them involved in group work, getting them to do things, right? I mean, I've worked with young people who steal cars and break into houses and all the rest of it. And the big thing that stopped them from doing it wasn't curfews, but it was the fact that they went through a process, they made a mistake, they realised they'd done something wrong, and when they got a bit older, they got themselves a girlfriend, and they turned around and said, if you do stop stealing cars or breaking into houses, that means I don't want to see you anymore. That meant they had something to lose, and that's when they grew up, and they grow up into being adults.
Right, okay, so clearly girls don't do anything naughty when they're under 15. But anyway, yep, straight out the middle of the back.
I've worked as a youth worker for a number of years with Asian youth, and it's amazing just a bit of communication, how far it goes. What the youth are desperately looking for are role models, and we don't have them in our society today. Gascoigne, Tony Blair, etc. Forget them, they're nothing. The government is looking for a desperate solution to the breakdown of the family unit in society, and this curfew is just a feeble solution in my opinion.
Well, can I just ask something? How many people here would have effectively fallen foul of this curfew if it had been introduced when you were young? How many of you were out after the age of 10 when you were under 15? Right. Now, how many of you, if you have children, would like to see your kids, if they're 13, 14, out after 10 o'clock? Can I just get a couple of voices? Where's that mismatch coming from?
The thing is, there's been a tremendous change, a moral collapse in the 30 years since I was a young boy. When I was a youngster, as I said, I get involved in a lot of fights.
Order, please.
I get involved in a lot of fights, but it's between me and another willing participant, generally, or somebody that had insulted me. It was a square go. Now it's the law of the jungle. It's a jackal pack ripping apart the weakest, and that is the reality. Because I live amongst it, madam.
I'm a retired detective superintendent at City of Glasgow Police, and I think that would let me say something from experience. In recent years, and it's very sad that I should have to recall it, we've had children, 8-, 9-year-old, committing murder, in England particularly. We've had children bullying, causing suicides. We've had all sorts of things.
Can I just have some order?
And if we stopped, if the police who are going to be operating in Hamilton stopped one school from being burnt down, cost a rebuilding of £1 million, they have done a good job.
The gentleman at the back here in the blue shirt said that all kids go through a wild period, and I think we'd all agree with that. Could any of us sit with Tommy in front of us and say, sorry, you've got to move into your back room, but these kids are going through a wild period? The curfew is just a starting point. It needs a lot more work on it, but we need a starting point somewhere.
I'm totally against this curfew. Why we've come to this sorry state, in fact, is because of the lack of discipline. There's a lack of discipline right through some society, from childhood, through school, and later on in life. And this is why we've come to the situation today. We were actually talking about locking, the ridiculous situation today. We were actually talking about locking up children. It's a nonsense. What we need in this society is more discipline and more police in the street to catch the villains, not to chase the children.
Discipline starts
starts at home before children reach the age of 4 and 5. You start it there. You don't expect the teachers to do it. It's not fair on them. They're there to teach children about education. You don't blame it on policemen. You don't blame it on anyone else. It's your responsibility as parents to educate your children to respect the law and to respect their parents and other people. Then you will solve the problem. It's not the state's fault. And why should the state? And I'll say one more thing. We're talking about a curfew after 10 o'clock where most children who should be going to damn school the next day should be in bed anyway.
I mean, can we please understand that there is a very small minority of children who are habitual criminals, and curfewing will not solve that problem.
Because you're curfewing at the moment. What happens?
They can't. They're brought back by the police. The police come in, the police give them a little speech, the police say all the right things. Some of the children sit quiet and listen, some of the children argue. It depends on the personality of the child. But all of them say, up yours, I'm doing what I want. And most of them, by the time they're 18, 19 or 20, are reasonable citizens. Some of them will go on to commit crime and be adult criminals, but most of them become reasonable citizens.
So when we come to this question about the age of responsibility, it's actually in Scotland it's 8.
That's ridiculous.
In England it's 14. Now, is there some contradiction in that we're saying that children are responsible for their actions legally, and yet they can't go out on the street?
Under Scottish law, a child would be legally able to decide whether or not to get a kidney transplant, but would not be able to walk down the street. Now, there is a contradiction there. If a child is old enough to mind its own business in terms of medical treatment, once it's explained to them, then surely they're able to go from A to B.
Certainly from my experience, my own personal experience, and for those of my children, that 8 is a reasonable age at which to expect children to have a sense of responsibility. However, our personalities and our understanding of life continues to develop. And what this curfew is suggesting is that we prevent the development in a wrong direction, because it will give children, first of all, as was said, a benchmark. They know that when their parents say you must be home by 10, it's backed up by law. It means that there's more control, the ability to control your children. Now, as was said, children should not be out at 10. They've got to go to school next morning. When are they going to sleep if they are going to be out playing? And that, of course, leads to deterioration of their performance at school. This is probably a short-term measure, and it must be included with a whole lot of other community and other activities
So,
which
Craig,
will enable children.
you'll be voting yes?
Yes, I certainly will be voting yes.
Right, OK, thank you. There's no more time for debate now. I'd like to hear a summing up speech from Alistair, very briefly. Alistair.
One thing we've neglected to discuss in this part of the debate is the forgotten people, the victims. Not one of us even addressed a remark toward the victims, and they are the silent majority who are having to put up with this menace. So I urge you to vote for the motion, and let's start redressing the balance. Thank you.
Right, thank you. OK, we're going to go to a vote now. Just to remind you, the motion is to combat juvenile crime, all children under the age of 15 should be subject to a 10 p.m. curfew. Would all those in favour of it vote yes? Those against vote no. And if you don't vote within 10 seconds, you'll be deemed to have abstained. Well, I declare the voting to be over. The result is 29 for, 51 against, no abstentions. The People's Parliament has voted not to curfew the under-15s. I declare the House adjourned.
So, in the end, the argument that the curfew was the wrong policy, targeting the wrong group of people, perhaps at the wrong time of day, easily prevailed. But I got the impression on this issue that many of the MPPs, usually of firmly held views, were wavering one way or another throughout the evening. And it's just possible more would have backed a curfew if it was part of a wider package of social and community reforms. But let's go and see what the real mood is like on the lobby floor. Sorry to interrupt you all in your post-mortem. Jackie, you spoke against the curfew. You must be relieved by the size of that vote's margin.
Yeah. I think it's quite good that people have voted against it as well. I don't think imposing a curfew is going to change anything. All it's going to do is bring out more children that are having problems. What happens? The parents don't take responsibility. The child ends up getting removed from the house, put into care, and it doesn't resolve nothing because care workers can't control them either.
It's seen as quite a populist measure, a curfew. So why do you think the People's Parliament voted so strongly against it?
If you're putting a curfew on children, you're taking parents' responsibility away from them. You're then putting their responsibility in the hands of the police to bring their children home when it's your responsibility to have your children in by yourself. Which, me as a parent, I would not like anybody sitting taking my responsibility to my daughter away from me. I brought her into this world and it's up to me to bring her up appropriately in the way I think correct. And I don't think imposing a curfew and taking responsibilities away from people is going to make that happen.
So a curfew is not the solution. There are other ways of being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. That's according to the People's Parliament.
Marianne Faithfull, from debutante to a life of deprivation. Next on 4, Lady Luck shines once again on this week's Brit Girl.
For us computer fans, Christmas means PC World. Britain's biggest range of PCs, software and accessories, and value that's out of this world.
The choice of top brands goes on and on, plus a free printer on many PCs. And we can install and start up your PC for you.
Any questions, just ask. That's what we're here for. Welcome to our world.
Where in the world? Don't miss it. PC World.
Powerful grip. Hand-cooked tyres.
Argos has heaps of Christmas gift ideas. For a precious mum, for a gorgeous girl, for a talkative aunt, for your prettiest daughter, aren't they all? For your star performer, for the spaced out twins, for your handyman, for your own special spice. Please them all at a price you'll like. Pick up a December copy of Argos Plus now.
Glade Essence of Nature fragrant candles. Created by nature, captured by Glade.
Make someone happy this Christmas.
That's great.
Come to Comet. Are those hankies soft?
Kleenex Ultra Soft. Got a dry to the touch lotion. So much softer on my delicate little nose.
I've got Kleenex Ultra Balm tissues. Is my cold worse than yours? They leave behind a microfiber balm with calendula to help protect my skin from drying out.
Kleenex Ultra Soft with a silk touch lotion. Kleenex Ultra Balm with a protective balm. Kleenex, a touch better.
Enticing, stimulating and challenging. Channel 4's late night talk for Saturdays. Something you won't regret Sunday morning.
Art House, a profile of rap artist, composer and writer Tricky, one of Britain's most original musicians. Art House brings him home to the Bristol Estates to record his personal and musical influences. Naked and Famous, followed by Tricky live in concert, Sunday 11:05 on 4.
Now on 4, a triumphant survivor of the 60s, Marianne Faithfull.